Don't.
The gun was already in his hand when the lights went out. Sung-min Yo stood in the center of his penthouse study, every nerve in his body calibrated to the dark the way only a man who has survived 4 assassination attempts can be. He did not move. He did not breathe loud. He listened to the building the way you listen to something alive, counting the silences between silences, reading the architecture of the quiet for anything that didn't belong. Nothing. Just the rain against the glass, 60 floors above Chicago, and the particular stillness of a building that had just had its power cut from the inside. He lowered the gun slowly, because it wasn't an attack. Not yet. An attack would have come with the darkness. Whoever had done this was waiting for something first, waiting for confirmation maybe, waiting to hear the sound of a man dying in a room he had been poisoned in 6 hours ago. He walked to the window. Chicago spread out below him in the rain, enormous and indifferent, the lake black at the edges where the light couldn't reach. He pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and stayed there. His stomach was a wall of heat. His legs were doing the thing they had been doing since the drive back from the dinner, a slow, quiet betrayal, the muscles softening in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. 12 hours, Dr. Lim had said, meeting him at the gate with the face of a man delivering a verdict. He had rehearsed on the elevator ride up. 24 at the outside, military-grade compound, no antidote. "I'm sorry, Mr. Yo." Sung-min had nodded once, walked upstairs alone. He had not called Kwon Tae-sung, his second-in-command, whose entire job for 11 years had been to handle exactly this kind of crisis. He had not summoned his lawyers. He had not woken the 3 lieutenants sleeping in the East Wing whose presence would have transformed this penthouse into a war room within 20 minutes. He had sat on the edge of his bed in the dark instead, and he had thought about a boy from Incheon who had wanted once to be an architect, who had drawn buildings in the margins of his school notebooks, towers with impossible angles and gardens on every floor, the kind of structures that made people stop walking and just look up. That boy had been 17 the last time he drew anything. He had been practical ever since. 17 years of surviving things that should have killed him, and it would be 1 glass of whiskey at a table full of smiling men
Thank you all for coming.
Brought him down.
Let us
He
hope this
almost
evening is
laughed.
productive.
The sound that came out stopped him. The dinner had been perfect, and that was the thing that made it so clean, so humiliating. The Haesung deal had closed exactly the way it was supposed to close. The right people in the right room saying the right things. Crystal glasses raised, handshakes held 2 seconds too long, the way they always were when men who didn't trust each other pretended otherwise. Sung-min had been careful. He was always careful. 1 drink, always 1 drink. He had learned at 19 in the most permanent way possible what happened to men in his world who let their guard slip for a single moment, and he had never forgotten the lesson. 1 glass. 1 glass with his name already in it, before the evening even started. He pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and closed his eyes. 3 floors below him, somewhere in the staff quarters of this building, his men were already deciding who would take the empire when he died. He knew it the way he knew everything, not because anyone had told him, but because he understood power the way a man understands weather after enough years of being caught in it. Power didn't wait for permission. Power filled every vacuum the moment one appeared. He had 3 hours, maybe 4, before the pain became something he couldn't manage standing up. He pushed off from the window and walked back to the bed. He did not see it coming. That was the thing he would think about later in the weeks that followed, when he had the luxury of thinking about things. He had survived 4 attempts on his life, through a combination of paranoia, preparation, and a particular animal instinct for threat that had never once failed him. He could read a room in 10 seconds. He could identify the dangerous man at a table of 40. He had been doing it since he was 19 years old in a city that taught you to read danger or become a story someone else told. He had not seen a 20-month-old boy coming. He heard it before he saw anything. A soft sound, the particular rhythm of someone moving who had absolutely no idea they were supposed to be quiet. 2 feet padding across marble. A pause. Then the unmistakable sound of small hands finding the edge of the mattress. A weight at the foot of the bed. A slow, determined crawl upward, pausing twice, then resuming until something warm and solid pressed against his left side and stopped moving entirely. Sung-min turned his head. The boy looked back at him. He had enormous dark eyes and the completely unimpressed expression of someone who had just located a perfectly acceptable sleeping arrangement and saw absolutely no reason to explain himself further. He looked at Sung-min the way 20-month-olds look at everything, without hierarchy, without fear, without the careful social calculus that adults spent their entire lives performing. Just a face, just a person, just a warm place to be. Then the boy yawned, a full jaw-cracking, entirely unbothered yawn. He laid his cheek flat against Sung-min's chest, right over the place where the pain was worst, and closed his eyes. Sung-min stared at the ceiling. The warmth spread. He told himself it was physics, simple body heat, his nervous system responding the way any body would to external warmth in a cold room. There was nothing miraculous about it. He was a practical man. He did not believe in signs. He did not believe in mercy. He certainly did not believe the universe occasionally looked down at dying men who had done the things he had done and decided, quietly, not yet. But the fire in his chest pulled back 1 degree, then another. His heartbeat steadied. He did not move the child. He lay perfectly still in the dark with the rain against the windows and the weight of a sleeping boy on his chest, and he rested one palm flat and careful against the small, warm back, and he stayed. Before we go any further, if this story already has you locked in, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments below. We read every single one. Now stay with me, because what happens in this house over the next 3 weeks will break your heart and put it back together at the same time. Her name was Zara Okafor, and she was mopping marble at 11:15 at night because she had nowhere better to be. That was the truth she didn't say out loud, the one that lived beneath the practical explanation she gave whenever anyone asked why she stayed so late. The practical explanation was the overtime. The real explanation was the apartment in Wicker Park that held nothing but memories she hadn't figured out how to outrun yet. She paused by the window at the end of the East Corridor and looked out at Chicago blurring through the rain, and the memory came the way it always came, without knocking, without apology, without any regard for whether she was ready. South Side Chicago, 22 months ago, a Thursday in November. Her brother Dami, 27 years old, youth football coach at a community center on Halsted Street, the kind of man who remembered every kid's birthday and stayed 2 hours after sessions ended to talk to the ones who needed talking to. Dami, who had called her Z since she was 4 years old. Dami, who had driven 6 hours from Chicago to Detroit when Eli was born just to be in the waiting room, just to be there, because that was the kind of man he was. Dami, who walked to a corner store on a Thursday evening to buy baby formula for Eli because Zara had run out and was too exhausted from a double shift to go herself. He had texted her a photo of the shelf, asking which brand, the way he always asked about things he didn't know because he wasn't too proud to ask. She had sent back a voice note, laughing, teasing him about not knowing the difference between brands. He never made it home. A dispute between 2 crews, a corner that belonged to someone, 3 bullets that had nothing to do with Dami Okafor and everything to do with the city that sometimes consumed the innocent as casually as it consumed everything else. He was found on the pavement 20 minutes later. The plastic bag with the formula was still tied to his wrist, like he had refused, even at the end, to let go of the reason he was there. Zara had identified the body. She picked up the mop again. Down the hall in the staff bunk room, Eli was asleep. His breathing even, his small face doing that thing it did in sleep, going completely soft, all the energy of the day just dropping off him like he'd set down a heavy bag. He had Dami's nose, the exact shape of it, the exact angle. She mopped the marble and did not think about the phone call she had received 6 weeks after the funeral. The man who had found her in a diner in Queens when she was still in New York before she took the Chicago posting. She did not think about the folder he had slid across the table. She was very good at not thinking about things she had decided not to think about. She was getting worse at it. She found them at 2:49 in the morning. She had come through the door fast, her heart already in her throat, Eli's name forming on her lips, because the door to the corridor was open, and Eli had learned last week that the handle was within reach if he climbed the side of the crib, and she had been meaning to address that with Hannah about a crib upgrade and hadn't gotten to it yet. She scanned the room and stopped. Sungmin Yeo, the most feared man in 3 states, lay flat on his back in the dark. Her son was asleep on his chest. Both of them were breathing. She crossed the room in 3 steps and reached for Eli. "Don't!" The words stopped her hand in the air. She looked at Sungmin's face. He was watching her. His eyes were exhausted and burning and stripped of every single layer she had ever seen on a powerful man's face. All of it was gone. The performance, the authority, the careful management of exactly how much he allowed you to see. Gone. Just a man in the dark, holding very still around something that was keeping him alive. "The pain," he said. His voice came out rough, lower than usual, like something that had been worn down to its foundation. "It's less." Zara looked down at her son. Eli's fingers had found the pocket of Sungmin's shirt and were holding on loosely in sleep. The way he held things he had decided were his. She looked back at Sungmin. "I'll stay outside the door," she said quietly. He didn't answer. His eyes had already dropped back to Eli, and then, slowly, with the deliberate care of a man making a movement he hadn't made in years, he rested his palm flat against her son's small back. Zara walked to the doorway. She leaned against the wall outside. She stood there with her arms folded and her eyes open and her heart doing something she didn't have a name for yet, and she stayed until the light changed. Dr. Lim arrived at 6 in the morning. He checked the vitals. He stood at the monitor for a long time without speaking. When he finally turned around, his face had the expression of a man whose entire professional framework had just been quietly dismantled. "Mr. Yo," he said, "the compound levels, the rate of decline overnight." He stopped, started again. "Medically, I cannot explain what happened in this room." Eli was awake. He was standing in Sungmin's lap on unsteady legs, both fists locked in the man's collar, delivering what appeared to be an extremely important monologue in a language only he fully understood. Sungmin was looking at the boy the way a man looks at something he doesn't have the vocabulary for yet, something that has bypassed every defense he spent decades constructing and arrived anyway, small and certain and completely unconcerned with his defenses. In the corridor, the doctor passed Zara on his way out. "He's going to live," he said. Zara met his eyes. "Good," she said, warm, relieved. She said it exactly the right way. She was very good at saying things exactly the right way. Sungmin did not tell anyone what had happened in that room. When his men filed in at 7 and 8 with their careful faces and their prepared expressions, he sat at the head of the long table in yesterday's shirt and told them the antidote had worked. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked at each other directly. He watched them. He watched who exhaled with relief. He watched who exhaled with something that was trying very hard to look like relief, but wasn't. He watched who kept their face so perfectly neutral that the neutrality itself became the answer. He had a name before they reached the stairs. Kwon Tae-sung, 11 years, present at the dinner. And when Sung-min had walked into that sitting room alive that morning, Kwon had gone still in a way that lasted exactly half a second too long. That was all it had. Taken. Sung-min picked up his coffee, looked out at Chicago, and began to plan. If this story is doing something to you right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us what you're feeling. Like the video so more people find this story. And stay with us, because what happens next changes everything. He was in his second-floor study at noon when Kwon walked in without knocking. The door swung open with the casual confidence of a man who had been doing it for 11 years and had never once been told not to, a man who had built his entire position in this organization on the assumption that familiarity was the same thing as loyalty, that proximity to power was the same thing as being trusted by it. Sung-min was at his desk, still moving slowly, his body doing the quiet rationing that a body does when it is deciding how much energy to release and how much to hold back. He looked up. Kwon stood in the doorway with the face he always wore when he was performing concern, the slight forward lean, the eyes just a degree too soft, everything calibrated for a man who was supposed to still be on the edge of death and therefore easier to read wrong. "Just checking in, boss," Kwon said. "After last night, I wanted to see you with my own eyes." Sung-min looked at him for exactly the right amount of time, not too long, not too short. "Sit down, Kwon." Kwon did not sit. He took 2 steps closer instead, his body angling in the particular way that bodies angle when they are preparing to do something they have already decided to do, the weight shifting forward, the right hand beginning its slow drift toward the small of his back. Sung-min was already registering the geometry of it, the angle of the shoulders, the way the left foot had planted itself, when the crash came from the corridor. Something heavy. Marble. The unmistakable sound of an object meeting a floor with absolute commitment. Kwon's head snapped toward the door. Half a second, less maybe. But it was there, and it was enough, and Sung-min had spent 17 years turning moments exactly that size into the difference between alive and not. The drawer, the Glock. 2 shots center mass before Kwon finished turning back around. The study went very quiet. The rain against the windows, the city below, moving and indifferent. Then, from the doorway, a small voice. "Uh-oh." Eli was standing in the corridor barefoot, his stuffed bear hanging from one fist by a single ear, looking down at the floor lamp he had apparently just pulled over, with the expression of someone who understood that something had gone wrong, but was not entirely sure it was their fault. He surveyed the room the way 20-month-olds surveyed rooms, without sequence, without hierarchy, taking in the overturned lamp, the man on the floor, the gun, all of it registering with equal weight, none of it computing into fear. Then he found the one familiar face. He lifted both arms. "June," he said. It was his version of the name. He couldn't manage the full thing. He shortened everything. June. He said it the way he said everything, like a statement of fact, like the world was simple, and the simple thing was that here was a person he knew, and the obvious next step was to be picked up by that person. Sung-min set the gun down very slowly. He looked at the boy in the doorway, both arms still raised, completely patient, completely certain that the arms being raised was sufficient argument. Something moved across Sung-min's face, that he did not have a name for and did not try to find one. He stood up from behind the desk. He could hear her already, footsteps on the staircase, fast, the real pace, not the measured walk she used on shift. She came around the corner and saw the body first, then Eli, then Sung-min. She crossed the room in 3 strides and scooped Eli up against her chest. "Don't look, baby." "He's fine," Sung-min said. His voice was lower than usual, flattened out at the edges. Eli was already perfectly content in her arms, reaching for her earring with the focused determination of someone pursuing a specific goal. Her eyes moved from the body to the gun to Sung-min. "What happened?" "He came to finish the job from last night." She absorbed this without changing her face, and he noticed that too. Filed it next to the other things he had been noticing about her. The way she never asked more than one question at a time, the way she never flinched when she should have, the way she always said the right thing the right way, always without hesitation, like someone who had learned to manage their reactions, the way other people managed spreadsheets. "And the lamp?" "Your son pulled it over. The noise gave me half a second." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Twice," Sung-min said quietly. "Your son has saved my life twice." She didn't answer. She held Eli tighter against her shoulder and looked at a point just past Sung-min's head, and he watched her jaw set in the particular way that jaws set when someone is keeping something inside by force of will alone. Her phone had buzzed in her back pocket 20 minutes ago. He didn't know that, but something in her stillness told him there were things she was managing that had nothing to do with this room, and he stored it the way he stored everything, without reaction, without urgency, in the part of his mind where he kept the things he was not yet ready to look at directly. He told her to move into the West Wing guest suite tonight. Eli needed stability, and she needed locks, and he needed to know where they both were while he dismantled whatever network Kwon had been operating inside his house. She objected. He had expected her to. "It's not appropriate," she said. "The other staff." "The other staff will not be a problem." "Mr. Kang." "June." She stopped. He looked at her steadily. "You used my name last night. Use it now." A beat that lasted 3 full seconds. "Sung-min, people will talk." "People started talking the moment your son walked into my room and didn't come out. Let them." He stepped past her and spoke to Hana at the top of the staircase, who was already there with the composed expression of a woman who had heard gunshots in this building before and had long ago made peace with the fact that her job description was broader than any contract specified. West Wing guest suite, crib upgrade tonight, child-proofing on the handles. Hana nodded once. "The other matter is already handled, sir," she said, and she meant the body, and she was already walking away. The West Wing guest suite was 3 times the size of the staff bunk room. Zara stood in the doorway with Eli on her hip and looked at the wide bed, the afternoon light through thin curtains, the fresh crib already assembled in the corner, a detail that meant Hana had moved with a speed that suggested she had been expecting this for some time. Eli squirmed down the moment she loosened her grip and toddled across the floor, delighted by the echo his feet made on the hardwood, stopping to test it twice, slapping both palms flat on the surface to hear the sound again. She sat on the edge of the bed. She had not intended to sleep in this house. She had not intended a great many things that were currently happening. She took the phone out of her pocket. The contact was saved under 2 letters, RD. The message was short. "Heard about the incident. Kwon is down. Are you all right? Raymond Doyle, 52 years old, 22 years with the Federal Financial Crimes Division before they pushed him into early retirement for digging too deep into the wrong ledgers. He had found her in a diner in Queens 6 weeks after Dami's funeral, when she was still in New York, before the Chicago posting, before any of this. He had slid a folder across the table with the quiet precision of a man who had been waiting for the right moment for a long time. Inside, photographs, financial records, a web of transactions that connected the Yeo organization to the supply chains that fed the street crews that controlled the corners where boys like Dami Okafor walked on Thursday evenings to buy baby formula and didn't come home from. "I'm not asking you to hurt anyone," Doyle had said. "I'm asking you to be my eyes inside that house. Names, documents, financial structures, I bring them down legally for Dami." She had looked at the photographs for a long time. Then she had said yes. She typed, "Fine, we'll talk later," deleted the thread, put the phone face down on the mattress. Eli had found the curtain and was bunching the fabric in both fists with the intensity of someone conducting a very serious textile examination. "Come here, baby," she said softly. He came immediately, the way he always came when she used that voice. The real one, the one that had nothing to do with composure or management or saying things the right way. He climbed into her lap and she wrapped both arms around him and pressed her chin to the top of his head and stayed very still. Outside the window, Chicago was going about its afternoon, enormous and unbothered. Somewhere in this building, the most dangerous man in the city was alive because her son had pulled over a lamp. She closed her eyes and held her son and tried not to think about what that meant. She was getting worse at not thinking about things. Days passed, then a week. Nobody on the staff said anything directly. They were paid well enough to know that saying things directly in this house was a reliable way to stop being paid at all. But the talk moved the way talk moves through closed spaces, in the half-second before an answer, in the particular quality of a silence that meant someone had just stopped speaking when you walked around a corner. The West Wing corridor, unused for years, was now somewhere Sung-min Yo walked in the evenings at no particular hour, slowly, without apparent destination, which was so far outside the established pattern of his behavior that Hannah had mentioned it to nobody and thought about it constantly. He had been seen twice now, crouching on the corridor floor, in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, playing something with Eli that involved a bottle cap and an intensity of focus that was, by any reasonable measure, disproportionate to the stakes of the game. The staff noticed. They said nothing. But the building had a pulse, and the pulse was changing, and everyone who worked inside its walls could feel it the way you feel a shift in air pressure before weather comes. Eli learned his name on a Tuesday, or rather, Eli assigned him a name which was different from learning one and considerably more binding. Zara was finishing the East Wing windows when she heard it, the small voice coming from around the corner, certain and declarative in the way that Eli said everything. "June." She came around the corner. Eli was on the floor with his blocks. Sung-min was crouched in front of him, forearms on his knees, still in his morning meeting clothes, a full day already behind him in those eyes. But not the dangerous stillness from before, not the stillness of a man managing threat. Something quieter. Something she didn't have a clean word for. "June," Eli said again, and stood up on unsteady legs and placed both hands flat on Sung-min's face, the way he placed his hands on things he was examining, without apology, without asking, with the complete confidence of someone who had not yet learned that there were faces in this world you were not supposed to touch. Sung-min held very still and allowed it. "He can't say the full name," Zara said from the corridor. "He shortens everything." "June is fine," Sung-min said. His voice had the quality it always had around Eli. Lower, slower, sanded down at the edges, like a frequency adjusted for a different listener. Eli patted his cheek twice with both palms, the verdict of a thorough inspection, then held up both arms. The pause lasted less than 2 seconds. Then Sung-min picked him up. He stood in the corridor of his own house with a toddler in his arms, who had immediately grabbed a fistful of his collar and was leaning back against his forearm to look up at the ceiling with the wonder of someone encountering it for the first time, and Sung-min looked like a man who had not been prepared for how natural that would feel, or how completely the weight of it would bypass every defense he had constructed and land somewhere underneath all of it, in a place he had not checked on in a very long time. Zara looked away first. He started talking to her in the evenings. It began with functional questions. Was the new crib the right height? Did the kitchen staff give Eli any trouble at breakfast? Did the West Wing heating run too warm at night? She would answer. He would stand with his back against the wall across from her, not performing casualness but actually inhabiting it, which was different, and which she noticed, and they would exist in the same space for a few minutes before one of them moved on. But the question shifted. How long had she been in Chicago? 3 years. Lagos first, then London for a year, then New York briefly, then here. That was a long way. It was. He was quiet for a moment. Why Chicago specifically? Work, and she had wanted somewhere that felt different from everything that came before it. He accepted that. He didn't push. He didn't ask the implicit question, the one that was really about Eli's father and why she was alone and how a woman from Lagos ended up mopping marble in a Gold Coast penthouse at 11 at night. Most people asked. They believed they were entitled to a woman's history simply by virtue of their curiosity about it. Sung-min just nodded once and let the answer be what it was. She filed that away. She filed everything away. One evening she asked him. The question came from somewhere that was not the plan, from the part of her that was increasingly difficult to manage, the part that kept noticing things it was not supposed to notice. "Did you always want this?" she said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "No," he said. Just the one word, but the weight in it was enormous. The weight of something that had been compressed for a very long time into a very small space. What happened to it? He pushed off from the wall. Same thing that happens to most things, he said. Someone took it. He walked away down the corridor, and she stood with her hands on the mop handle and looked at the space where he had been and tried not to feel what she was feeling. She was getting considerably worse at it, and she did not like what that meant. If you're still here, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it tells us to keep making stories like this one. Drop a comment and tell us, are you on Zara's side or Sung-min's side right now? Because the answer is about to get complicated. Batch 3 is coming and nothing will be the same after it. The gift appeared on a Friday evening, and it undid her in a way that gunshots and poison and dead men on office floors had not managed to do. She came into the West Wing room after her shift, Eli already ahead of her, toddling through the door with the confidence of someone returning to a place that belonged to them, and she saw the bag on the table immediately. Handled. Tied at the top. No note. She set Eli down and crossed the room and looked inside, without touching anything first, the habit of a woman who had learned to assess before she committed, and what she found was this. A set of children's wooden building blocks in primary colors, solid and well made, the kind that would last years, and underneath them, folded with a precision that suggested it had been handled carefully, a small padded winter jacket in deep navy blue. She lifted it out. Proper lining, reinforced zip, the kind of jacket that Chicago winters demanded and that she had been pricing online for 3 weeks and putting off buying because the good ones cost more than 2 full days of her wage. And Eli's current jacket still functioned if you didn't count the zipper, which she had been fixing with a safety pin for a fortnight and which she had told herself was fine. It was fine. It was a temporary measure while she sorted her finances. It was fine. She sat down on the edge of the bed and held the jacket in both hands, and ran her thumb slowly along the stitching at the collar. There was no note. There did not need to be a note. There was only one person in this building who had noticed the safety pin. She had caught it the morning 3 weeks ago in the corridor, the quick downward glance as she was bundling Eli into the jacket before the staff entrance, the almost imperceptible tightening around Seung-min's eyes that lasted less than a second before he looked away and continued his conversation with Hana as though nothing had interrupted it. She had not expected him to do anything about it. She had not expected him to still be thinking about it a week later, let alone 3. She had not expected any of this. Her phone buzzed on the mattress beside her. RD. 2 weeks since your last update, beginning to wonder if something has changed. Are you still functional? She stared at the message for a long time. Functional. That was one word for it. She thought about the diner in Queens, the folder on the table, the photographs of Dami on the pavement, the plastic bag still on his wrist. She thought about the version of herself who had sat across from Raymond Doyle and said yes without hesitating, the version of herself who had been so hollowed out by grief that the idea of justice, of purpose, of having a reason to get up and move through the world had felt like oxygen after a long time underwater. She had said yes. She had meant it. Some nights in the months that followed, in the small apartment in Wicker Park, when Eli was asleep and the city was quiet and she was alone with everything she was carrying, the part of her that was not a good person had wanted more than documents and financial records and a clean legal case. She had wanted him to lose something, the way she had lost something. She had wanted to be in the room when it happened. She had told herself it was just a thought. Everyone had thoughts. The thoughts were not the same as the actions. She was not that person. She was just a woman who had lost her brother and said yes to the wrong man in a diner, because yes was the only word she had left at the time. She typed "not compromised," "update coming," deleted the thread, put the phone face down on the mattress with a deliberateness that was almost violent. Eli had found the blocks and was arranging them on the floor with immense seriousness, stacking a red one on a yellow one on a blue one, watching the tower with the focused attention of an engineer assessing load-bearing capacity. "June," he said to himself, placing a green block on top with extraordinary care. Satisfied, like the name was a conclusion, like it explained something. Zara closed her eyes. She sat on the edge of that bed in the west wing of a crime lord's penthouse in Gold Coast, Chicago, and she held a navy jacket that cost more than 2 days of her wage, and she breathed in and breathed out and told herself she was still the same person who walked into this building 6 months ago. She was getting worse at believing it. The fever came on a Sunday night with no warning, the way toddler fevers always came. One moment everything was normal, and the next moment it wasn't, and there was no graceful transition between the two states. She had Eli in her arms, and she felt it before she saw it, the heat radiating through his clothing in a way that was wrong, and she put her palm to his forehead, and her stomach dropped. She had the thermometer out in 30 seconds, 39.4, high but not emergency high. She knew what to do. She had children's acetaminophen in her bag, and she knew the dosing and she knew the protocol. She had done this before. This was manageable. This was fine. What she did not have at 10 o'clock at night in the west wing of this building was anyone. She had not realized until this moment, sitting on the floor with Eli, heavy and glassy-eyed and miserable in her lap, how completely alone she had become accustomed to being, how thoroughly she had reorganized herself around the absence of anyone to call. She had not called her mother in Lagos since Dami's anniversary because the call would require her to sound like herself, and she wasn't sure she remembered how. She had no friends in Chicago, not real ones, not the kind you called at 10 on a Sunday night when your child was burning up and you needed someone to just be in the room. She sat on the floor with her son's head in her lap and the thermometer in one hand and the medicine bottle in the other, and she was completely, absolutely, efficiently alone, and she was fine with it. She had made her peace with it, and then the door opened. Sung-min stood in the doorway in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, the way they were in the evenings when the day was done and the performance of it was over. He took in the scene without speaking. The thermometer on the floor, the medicine bottle, Eli heavy-lidded and flushed against her leg, and he did not say, "Are you all right, or do you need anything," or any of the other things people said when they were observing a situation from a careful distance. He came in. He sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the side of the bed, and he put the back of his hand against Eli's forehead, the way someone does it who has done it before, gently, with the wrist, to get the truest read. Eli looked up at him from Zara's lap. "June," he said. The word came out small and miserable, the voice of someone reporting bad news. "I know, Eli," Sung-min said quietly. "I know." He stayed. He stayed for 2 full hours without making a production of it, without once suggesting that this was remarkable, or that he was making a sacrifice, or that she should feel anything particular about the fact of his presence. He simply occupied the floor across from her and handed her the cool cloth when she needed a fresh one, and spoke quietly to Eli in Korean. When the boy stirred, low, even sounds that had no translation she could access. But that worked. That actually worked. Eli's breathing slowing and steadying under them the way breathing does when the nervous system decides it is safe to relax. She found herself wondering in the spaces between checking Eli's temperature and adjusting the cloth what Sung-min Yo had been like before all of this, before the empire and the men with guns and the dinners where someone put military-grade poison in your glass. She found herself wondering about the boy from Incheon because she had heard Hana mention it once in passing, wondered what he had wanted, wondered who had taken it, wondered if any version of him that existed before 19 years old would recognize the man sitting on this floor right now, calm and present, speaking soft Korean to a sick toddler in the middle of the night, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was thinking about it too much. She knew she was thinking about it too much. At midnight, Eli finally went under into the deep sleep, the real one, his breathing evening out, his face cooler under her palm, his small body finally releasing the tension that fever built in little muscles. She laid him down in the crib slowly and stood up, and the room was very quiet, and Sung-min was still there, still on the floor with his back against the bed, looking at Eli in the crib with an expression she had stopped trying to classify, because classifying it required her to think about what it meant, and she was trying very hard not to think about what it meant. "You didn't have to stay," she said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I know," he said. She looked at him. Properly, for the first time, the way she almost never allowed herself to, across the sleeping child between them, in the low light of a room at midnight, with all the guards down, and nothing to manage and nowhere to perform anything. His face in that light was open in the way it only got in this room, with this child, the armor completely absent, and she thought about all the versions of powerful men she had encountered in her life. The performed versions, the managed versions, the versions constructed specifically to make you feel a certain way, and she thought that this was none of those things, that this was just a man on a floor at midnight who had stayed because he had wanted to stay and had not needed it to be anything more complicated than that. "Sung-min," she said, not Mr. Yo, his name, for the first time. She watched what it did to his face, the brief, involuntary stillness of it, something shifting behind his eyes like a door opening an inch in a room that had been sealed for a very long time. "You and Eli," he said. He stopped, tried again. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man locating words he had not used in so long he had to search for them. "You both make me want to live." A pause. "I don't know what to do with that." The room held the words for a moment. She held his gaze across the sleeping child between them and felt the thing she had been refusing to feel move through her chest like a current, warm and terrible, and completely indifferent to the fact that she had not given it permission. She thought about the folder on the table in the Queen's diner. She thought about the 17 weeks of documentation she had passed to Raymond Doyle. She thought about Dami on the pavement with the formula in his hand. She thought about a navy jacket folded carefully in a bag, with no note because no note was needed. She thought about a man who sat on a floor for 2 hours in the middle of the night because a child had a fever and she was alone and he had noticed. "Neither do I," she said. She meant it. That was the problem. She meant it from the part of her that had nothing to do with plans or folders or contacts saved under 2 letters, from the part of her that had been quietly, stubbornly, inconveniently coming alive for weeks in the corridors of a building she had entered as a spy, and was now, somehow, in ways she could not fully account for, beginning to think of as somewhere she belonged. That was the most dangerous thing she had felt yet. More dangerous than the body on the office floor, more dangerous than the gun on the desk, more dangerous than anything Raymond Doyle had asked her to do, or anything Sung-Min Yo's enemies had put in his glass. She looked down at Eli sleeping, and she stayed very still, and she did not let herself cry. She was very good at not letting herself cry. She was getting worse at that too. If you've made it this far, you already know. This story has its hooks in you, and it is not letting go. Do us a favor right now, share this video with one person who needs a story like this tonight. And leave a comment below, what do you think Zara is going to do? Because Batch 4 is the ending, and it will not go the way you think it will. Stay with us. Hannah found her in the corridor on a Monday morning with the composed expression of a woman who had decided that what she was about to say needed to be said, and had already made peace with the consequences of saying it. Zara was finishing the East Wing windows, the last task on her morning list, moving through the motions of it with the automatic efficiency of someone whose hands knew the work well enough to do it without the rest of her being present, because the rest of her was somewhere else entirely, had been somewhere else entirely for days now, turning the same set of facts over and over in the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling the edges, looking for the place where it was safe to put it down. "Mr. Yo's senior men are talking," Hannah said simply, stopping beside her without preamble, without the careful social architecture that most people constructed around difficult things. "About you and the boy. You should know that." Zara kept her eyes on the window. "I expected that." "Ryu Seong specifically," Hannah said. "He came to Mr. Yo yesterday evening. I was not in the room, but I was near it." A pause. The conversation was not short. Zara turned to look at her. Hannah's face gave nothing away, as it never did, as it had not in 14 years of working in this building, but her eyes had a quality that Zara had learned to read over the months, a particular directness that meant the next thing she said would be the most important thing in the conversation. "Someone has also been asking questions," Hannah said, "outside the house about staff records, employment histories, specifically the last 18 months of hires." The cloth in Zara's hand went still against the glass. "They were not subtle about it," Hannah continued, "which means either they are not good at this or they wanted us to know they were asking." She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "Raymond Doyle?" Zara said. Not a question. Hannah said nothing. She held Zara's gaze for 3 full seconds, which was Hannah's version of a very long speech, and then she walked away down the corridor with the measured pace of a woman who had delivered what she came to deliver and would not be discussing it further. Zara stood at the window with the cloth in her hand and looked out at Chicago and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that the walls had just finished closing in from both directions, and that she was now standing in a space that was the exact size of a decision. Doyle was moving. He had been patient for 18 months, patient in the way that men with federal instincts were patient, building slowly, methodically, never rushing the architecture of a case, because rushed architecture collapsed in court, and he knew it. But something had shifted. The Quan incident, maybe. Or the fever night, or the jacket, or the corridor conversations, or any of the 100 small accumulations that apparently looked, from the outside, like a woman who had stopped being an asset and started being a liability. She thought about the last message she had sent him, not compromised. She thought about the gap between those two words and the truth, and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She put the cloth in her bucket and walked to the West Wing and sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the phone and stared at it for a long time without unlocking it. Eli was in the staff kitchen with Mrs. Park, who had taken to saving him pieces of fruit in the mornings with a dedication that suggested she had been waiting her entire career for a toddler to feed. The room was quiet. Zara sat with the phone in her hands and did the thing she had been refusing to do for weeks. She looked at it directly, not around it, not at the edges of it, directly at the full shape of what she was holding. She had come into this house with a purpose and a grief, and a yes she had said in a diner to a man who had slid photographs of her dead brother across a laminate table and called it justice. She had spent 18 months moving through these rooms like a current beneath still water, seeing everything, recording everything, building a case that Raymond Doyle had told her would dismantle the Yale organization from the foundation up. She had names. She had financial structures. She had documentation of supply chain connections that 3 federal prosecutors would describe, in her imagination of the future she had been working toward, as airtight. She had everything Doyle had asked for, and the man it would destroy had sat on a floor for 2 hours in the middle of the night because her son had a fever and she had been alone. She put the phone face down and pressed both palms flat on her thighs and breathed. The part of her that was Dami's sister, the part that had identified his body and held the plastic formula bag in her hands and stood in a fluorescent corridor and understood in the most absolute way possible what it meant to lose someone because of the world that Sung-Min Yo's organization fed and sustained. That part was not gone. It had not softened. It had not been replaced by a navy jacket and corridor conversations and a man who said, "You make me want to live in the dark at midnight." She was not naive enough to believe that love, or whatever this was, whatever this thing was that she refused to name properly, canceled out what she knew. She was not the kind of woman who rewrote the ledger because the person on the other side of it had become human to her. He had always been human. That was never the question. The question was whether human was enough. She was still sitting there when she heard his footsteps in the corridor outside. She knew his walk by now, the particular rhythm of it, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a man who had decided long ago that urgency was something you felt on the inside and managed on the outside. The door opened. He stood in the doorway in a dark jacket, no tie, the end of a working day settling around him. He looked at her face and did not ask if she was all right, because he had learned, in the way that people learn things about each other in the space between words, that she did not answer that question honestly and did not appreciate being asked it. He came in instead and sat in the chair across from her and waited. That was one of the things about him that she had not expected, and had not prepared for and had not been able to file away cleanly. The waiting. He was extraordinarily patient with her silences in a way that no one had been since Dami, who had understood from a lifetime of being her brother that Zara Okafor processed things at her own pace, and the worst thing you could do was rush her toward a conclusion she hadn't reached herself yet. "Ryu came to you," she said, "yesterday." He looked at her steadily. "Yes." "What did he say?" "That you were a disruption, that the men were losing confidence in my judgment, that a woman with a child in the West Wing guest suite was a liability I had manufactured for myself, and that liabilities in this organization had historically had very short lifespans." He said it without performance, without the careful softening that people applied to frightening things to make them easier to hear. She had always appreciated that about him. She appreciated it less right now when the frightening thing was about her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that my judgment was not under review and that he was welcome to present his concerns in writing if he felt strongly about them." A pause. He did not feel strongly enough to do that. She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about Hannah in the corridor. Someone has been asking questions outside the house. She thought about Raymond Doyle in a federal building somewhere in this city, building his architecture, tightening his timeline, wondering why his asset had gone quiet. She thought about the version of this moment she had imagined in the early weeks, before all of it, before the fever night and the jacket and the bottle cap games in the corridor. She had imagined a moment like this one. She had imagined it differently. "Sung Min," she said. He held her gaze. "There is something I need to tell you." The room went very still, the way rooms went still when something was about to change in them permanently. She watched his face and she thought about all the ways this could go, all the versions of the next 10 minutes she had run through in the dark on the nights when sleep wouldn't come, and she thought about Dami, and she thought about Eli on his chest in the dark, and she thought about 2 shots center mass and a gun set down slowly on a desk, and she thought about the weight of still water and what it felt like when it finally moved. "I didn't come here by accident," she said. She told him. She told him all of it, the diner in Queens, the folder, the photographs, Raymond Doyle and his 22 years and his early retirement and his clean legal case. The yes she had said with both hands around a coffee cup in a Queens diner because it was the only word she had left. She told him what she had passed, the names, the financial structures, the supply chain documentation, 18 months of it, careful and thorough, the way she did everything. She told him about Dami, the corner store, the formula, the plastic bag on his wrist. She told him the thing she had never said out loud to anyone, that she had wanted more than justice in the beginning, that there had been a version of her in the early months that had wanted him to lose something the way she had lost something, that had wanted to be in the room when it happened. She said all of it without stopping, without softening it, without looking away from his face, because he deserved the full shape of it and because she was done with the space between her words and the truth. She was so tired of that space. He listened. He did not move. He did not interrupt her. He did not change his expression in any way that she could read cleanly. And she had spent 18 months learning to read him, and she could not read this. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Eli's voice floated up from somewhere below, the happy, declarative babble of a child doing something satisfying, distant and ordinary and entirely indifferent to the magnitude of what had just happened in this room. Sung-min looked at her for a long time. She held it. She owed him that much. To hold it, to not look away from whatever he was going to give her back. "The supply chain," he said finally. His voice was very quiet. "The crews it fed." She nodded. "Your brother?" She nodded again. A long pause. I know what my organization is connected to, he said. I have known for a long time. He stood up slowly from the chair and walked to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at Chicago the way she had stood, looking out at Chicago on 100 late nights in this building, the lake dark at the edges, the skyline burning. I have told myself for years that the distance between a decision and its consequences was large enough to live in, he said, that what happened on corners had nothing to do with what happened in boardrooms. A pause. Your brother tells me something different. She said nothing. She could not have spoken if she had tried. Doyle, he said. How close is he? Close, she said. Weeks, maybe. He's been asking questions outside the house. Hannah told me this morning. He nodded slowly, his back still to her. She looked at the line of his shoulders and thought about all the things a man could do in the next 10 minutes with the information she had just handed him. She had handed him everything. His freedom, his organization's survival, her exposure, Doyle's entire case. She had handed it to him completely and without condition, and she had done it because she could not carry the weight of the other thing any longer, the space between her words and the truth, the water that looked still from above and was anything but underneath. She had done it because Dami would have done it, not the Dami of the pavement, not the Dami of the plastic bag on his wrist, but the Dami of the phone calls and the voice notes and the 6-hour drive to Detroit, just to sit in a waiting room. That Dami would have told the truth in the room when it mattered. She was trying, imperfectly and very late, to be that. He turned around. She could not read his face still, not completely, but there was something in it that was not what she had feared, that was not the cold management of a threat, and she breathed in carefully through her nose. I'm not going to run from Doyle, he said. She stared at him. I've been thinking about it for longer than you know, he said. What I would have to dismantle, what I would have to build instead, what it would cost and whether I was willing to pay it. He looked at her steadily. I didn't have a reason to pay it before. The words landed. She felt them land. She felt them in the place that was tired of being managed and tired of the space between her words and the truth, and tired of being alone in a way that had nothing to do with the presence or absence of other people in a room. This will not be clean, she said. No, he agreed. It will take time. Yes, people in your organization will not accept it. Some of them won't, he said. Those are a separate problem. Doyle may not trust a cooperative source. He has been building against you for years. He wants a case, not a conversation. Then we give him a better one, Sungmin said. From the inside. Everything, not what you've already passed him. Everything. She looked at him for a long time. Why? She said. Not a challenge. A genuine question. The most genuine question she had asked in 18 months. He held her gaze with an openness she had only ever seen in that room at midnight with Eli sleeping between them. Because a boy from Incheon who wanted to build things, he said quietly, should probably start. Outside, Chicago moved through its evening, enormous and indifferent as always, the lake black at the edges, the skyline burning gold, and somewhere below them in the warmth of the staff kitchen, a small boy was saying, June to himself over and over with quiet satisfaction, like a name that explained everything, like the simplest and most complete answer to a question nobody had known how to ask until now. She said yes. Not the yes from the diner, not the yes of a woman with nothing left and a folder in front of her, and grief so wide she would have said yes to anything that gave it a direction. This yes came from somewhere that had been rebuilt over 18 months in corridors and conversation and the weight of a child on a dying man's chest. It came from the part of her that had been Dami's sister before it was anything else, and that still believed, stubbornly, impractically, against considerable evidence, that people were capable of becoming something other than the worst thing they had ever done or allowed. She looked at him across the room and she said yes, and she meant it from the ground up, and the walls did not close in, they opened. And that is where we leave them, not at the ending, because some stories don't end, they turn. A man who built an empire deciding it was finally time to build something else. A woman who came in through the back door of someone's life and somehow ended up at the center of it. And a boy who never knew any of it was complicated, who just found a warm chest in the dark and put his cheek down and decided, with the total authority of the very young, that this was where he belonged. Nobody told the 20-month-old boy that any of this was hard. He just lifted his arms and said up. Sometimes that is the whole story. Sometimes that is the only story that ever mattered. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle of it and not entirely sure when you started, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and leave us a comment below, just one word. The one word this story left you with. We read every single one. We will see you in the next one.